I hike alone most of the time, not because I dislike hiking with other people. It just became habit over the years. A few hours in the woods was the easiest way I knew to clear my head. No emails, no phone calls, no noise. Just the trail. The day this happened, I picked a state forest about an hour from my house. Nothing remote, nothing dangerous. The trail was well marked and popular enough that getting lost wasn't really a concern. At least that's what I thought. The hike started normally. The weather was perfect. Cool air, clear skies, just enough sunlight filtering through the trees. I parked near the trailhead, grabbed my backpack, and headed in. The trail markers were easy to follow. Small blue rectangles attached to trees every couple hundred yards. I've hiked enough to know how important those markers are. If you ever get turned around in the woods, they're often the only thing keeping you moving in the right direction. So naturally, I paid attention to them. About 2 miles into the hike, I noticed something strange. One of the blue markers was red. I stopped walking. At first, I assumed I had reached a different section of trail. Maybe another route intersected here. Maybe the park used different colors for different paths. No big deal. Then I looked around. Every other marker was still blue. Just that one was red. It seemed odd, but not alarming. I took a picture of it, mostly because I thought it was unusual, and kept walking. About 15 minutes later, I saw another red marker, then another, then another. Now I was confused. The trail map I had downloaded only showed blue markers for this route. There shouldn't have been any red ones, yet somehow they kept appearing. Eventually, I reached a fork in the trail. One direction had a blue marker, the other had a red. I checked my map. According to the GPS of my phone, the blue trail was correct. The red trail wasn't listed at all. I remember standing there debating whether to investigate. Curiosity won. I followed the red marker, just for a few minutes. The path was narrow, less maintained, almost like it wasn't meant for regular hikers. Still, the red markers continued. Every few hundred feet, always visible, always leading forward. After about 10 minutes, I realized something unsettling. The markers looked new. Not just newer than the blue ones, brand new. Fresh paint, fresh screws. No weathering, no fading, nothing. It looked as though someone had installed them recently, very recently. I decided that was enough exploring. I turned around and headed back toward the main trail. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The red markers behind me weren't there anymore. I stopped, looked around, then looked again. Nothing. The trail I had just followed now had no markers at all. I stood there for several seconds trying to understand what I was seeing. The path remained. The trees remained. Everything remained, except the markers. Every single one was gone. I actually walked back several hundred yards searching for them. Nothing. No paint. No signs of removal. No broken screws. Nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself I was losing my mind. Maybe I had mistaken ribbons or trail tape for markers. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I wasn't paying attention. Whatever the explanation was, I didn't like it. I found the main trail and started heading back towards the parking lot. For the next hour, everything seemed normal, until I saw another red marker. This one was attached to a tree directly ahead of me. A tree I had already passed earlier. I knew I had. There was no possibility I had missed it. Yet there it was, bright red, fresh paint, pointing deeper into the woods. And beneath it, carved into the bark, were 3 words: "Keep going this way." I immediately felt cold. Not because of the message, because I knew it hadn't been there earlier. Someone would have had to carve it recently, very recently. The bark around the letters still looked fresh. I looked around. The woods were silent. No birds, no insects, no wind, nothing. Then I heard a branch snap, somewhere ahead, not behind me, ahead, in the direction the marker pointed. I waited, listening. Another snap, then another. Slow and deliberate, like someone walking. I never saw anybody, but I knew someone was there. The feeling was immediate. The same feeling you get when you realize you're no longer alone. I started walking back towards the trailhead, fast. The snapping followed, always somewhere off to my left, not close enough to see. never far enough away to ignore, for nearly 20 minutes. Eventually, I reached a busier section of trail. The sounds stopped immediately, just stopped, as though whoever had been following me knew they couldn't continue. I made it back to the parking lot shortly afterward, relieved, embarrassed, certain I'd overreacted. Then I noticed something attached beneath my windshield wiper, a small red trail marker, the same size, same color, the same fresh paint. On the back, written in black marker, was a single sentence. "You turned around too soon." I got in my truck and left. I never returned to that trail, never reported the marker, never told anyone, because every explanation I came up with sounded impossible. If someone placed that marker on my truck while I was hiking, how long had they been close enough to do it? I've been hiking long enough to know what the woods sound like. You learn the difference between animals and people. A squirrel moving through the leaves sounds different than footsteps. A deer sounds different than a person. And a voice? A voice is impossible to mistake. That's why what happened still bothers me, because I know what I heard. It happened during a solo hike in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. The trail wasn't especially remote, but it wasn't crowded either. Most hikers preferred the more popular routes closer to the lake. This particular trail wound through the dense forest and eventually connected to an overlook about 6 miles from the trailhead. I'd hiked it once before without any problems. The second trip was different. I started around noon. The weather was perfect. Cool temperatures, clear skies, hardly any wind. For the first couple of hours, everything felt normal. I passed a few hikers near the beginning of the trail, exchanged quick greetings, and continued deeper in the forest. By the time I reached the halfway point, I hadn't seen another person for nearly an hour. That wasn't unusual. In fact, it was one of the reasons I liked hiking there. The overlook sat on a rocky ridge that offered a view of miles of forest. I spent maybe 20 minutes there eating a sandwich and taking pictures before beginning the hike back. That's when I heard my name. At first, it was so faint, I wasn't sure I'd actually heard it. It sounded like someone speaking from a distance, almost carried by the wind. "Dave." I stopped, listened. Nothing. I looked around. No hikers. No movement. Just trees. I remember smiling to myself. Your brain does strange things when you're alone for long periods of time. I assumed that's all it was. Then I kept walking. About 10 minutes later, I heard it again. "Dave." This time it was clearer, close enough that I immediately turned around. Nobody. The trail behind me stretched empty through the woods. No people, no animals, nothing. I stood there for nearly a minute listening. The forest remained completely still. Eventually, I convinced myself there had to be another hiker somewhere nearby. Maybe somebody I had passed earlier. Maybe someone talking to someone else. Maybe I was hearing something entirely different. But deep down, I already knew something wasn't right, because I hadn't told anyone where I was hiking that day. Nobody should have known I was there. I picked up my pace slightly and continued toward the parking area. For the next 20 minutes, everything remained quiet. Then the voice returned. "Dave." Closer, much closer. Close enough that I instinctively looked over my shoulder. The sound had come from directly behind me. Not somewhere in the woods. Not off the trail. Behind me. Like someone had been walking just a few feet away. I spun around. Nothing. The trail was empty. Every instinct in my body immediately went in overdrive. I started scanning the woods, searching for movement, searching for another hiker, searching for anything. There was nothing. Then I noticed something else. The forest had gone quiet, completely quiet. No birds, no insects, no rustling leaves, nothing. If you spend enough time in the outdoors, you know how unsettling that can be. The woods are never truly silent. When they suddenly become silent, something usually caused it. I told myself to stop being paranoid. Then I started walking again. The voice didn't return for almost 30 minutes. Long enough for me to relax. Long enough for me to start feeling stupid. Then I heard it one final time, right beside me. Dave. I physically jumped. Not because it was loud, because it was close. Close enough that I felt like someone had spoken directly in my ear. I stumbled off the trail and nearly lost my footing. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. And for the first time that day, I ran. Not a full sprint, just a fast, panicked jog down the trail. I didn't stop until I reached a small footbridge crossing a creek. That's where I finally saw another person, an older man hiking alone. The relief I felt was immediate. We exchanged a quick greeting as we passed. Then something occurred to me. I turned around. Hey, can I ask you something? The man stopped. I told him what had happened. The voice, the name, everything. He listened without interrupting. Then he asked, did it sound familiar? That question caught me off guard. What do you mean? The man shrugged. Did the voice sound like somebody you know? I thought about it. And that's when I realized something. It had. I couldn't place exactly who, but it felt familiar, comfortable, like hearing the voice of an old friend or a family member. The realization made me uncomfortable. The man nodded slowly, then said something strange. You're not the first person. Before I could ask what he meant, he started walking again. I never saw him after that. When I reached the parking lot, only 2 vehicles remained. Mine and another truck parked near the edge of the lot. The older man's truck. At least I assumed it was. But as I drove away, I looked in my mirror. The truck never moved. A month later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched online and eventually found a hiking forum discussing the same trail. Buried among dozens of posts was a conversation about something locals call the calling. Most people dismissed it as a legend. Others claimed they'd experienced it, hearing their name, hearing a familiar voice, hearing someone calling from deeper in the woods, always when hiking alone, always on the return trip, and always sounding like someone they trusted. I don't know what caused it. Maybe there was a natural explanation. Maybe isolation and exhaustion play tricks on people. Maybe stories spread until hikers started expecting to hear something. But I've hiked hundreds of trails since then, across several states, through forests far more remote than that one, and I've never heard my name called again, which is probably for the best, because the thing that still bothers me isn't that I heard the voice. It's for a split second, I almost followed it. The tower wasn't on the map. That's the first thing that should have told us to leave. The second thing was the trail leading to it, because according to every map, GPS app, and park guide we checked afterwards, that trail wasn't supposed to exist either. This happened about 4 years ago when 3 friends and I decided to spend a Saturday hiking in a national forest in West Virginia. We'd done dozens of hikes together before. Nothing extreme, just day hikes, usually 6 to 10 miles. The kind where you leave in the morning and you're home by dinner. This one was supposed to be no different. The trail itself was popular. A well-marked loop that wound through the mountains before reconnecting near the parking area. The first several hours were completely normal. Good weather, good visibility, plenty of other hikers, nothing unusual. Around noon, we stopped near a small clearing to eat lunch. That's when my friend Eric noticed the path. It wasn't marked, not officially anyway. A narrow trail disappeared into the trees about 50 yards off the main route. At first, we assumed it was an old maintenance road. Then we noticed something strange. The trail looked maintained. Not recently, consistently. Branches had been cleared. Brush had been cut back. The path looked used. Curiosity won, and it usually does. We agreed to follow it for a few minutes, just long enough to see where it went. Then we'd turn around. 30 minutes later, we were still walking. The trail kept climbing, winding deeper into the mountains. Occasionally, we'd talk about turning back. Then another bend would appear, another hill, another reason to keep going. Eventually, Eric stopped. "Do you guys see that?" At first I didn't. Then I looked through the trees. Something stood on the ridgeline above us. Tall, narrow, metal. A fire tower. The structure rose above the forest canopy like something from another era. Rust covered most of it. The stairs looked ancient. Several support beams appeared bent, yet somehow it remained standing. And somehow nobody mentioned it. Not on the maps, not online, nowhere. The tower sat at the end of the trail, completely isolated, surrounded by miles of forest. The closer we got, the stranger it felt. Not scary, just wrong. Like finding a building where no building should exist. The base of the tower contained an old equipment shed. The door hung partially open. Inside, we found empty food wrappers, water bottles, a sleeping bag. Someone had been there recently, very recently. One of the water bottles still contained condensation. That immediately changed the mood. Finding an abandoned tower is one thing. Finding evidence someone currently lives there is something else. We should have left. Instead, we climbed. The stairs groaned beneath our weight, several sections swaying noticeably. The higher we climbed, the more nervous I became. Eventually, we reached the observation room at the top. The door stood open. Inside sat a folding chair, a lantern, several notebooks, and a pair of binoculars. Everything appeared organized, neat and maintained, like someone expected to return. Nobody touched anything. We just stood there looking around. Then Eric picked up the binoculars. A few seconds later, his expression changed. "What?" I asked. He slowly handed them to me. "Look towards the parking lot." I adjusted the focus. The parking area sat miles away, barely visible through the trees, but eventually it came into view. And that's when I noticed something. Every vehicle was visible, including ours. I lowered the binoculars, then looked around the room again. The notebooks, the chair, the binoculars, the perfect view of the parking lot. Whoever used this tower wasn't watching wildlife. They were watching people. Nobody said it out loud, but we were all thinking the same thing. Then we heard footsteps coming up the stairs, slow, steady, metal clanging beneath each step. My stomach immediately dropped. The sound was unmistakable. Someone was climbing towards us. We looked at each other. Nobody spoke. The footsteps continued. Closer, closer. Then they stopped. Directly beneath the observation room. Silence. Complete silence. For nearly 30 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Finally, Eric stepped toward the doorway and looked down. The stairs were empty. Nobody's there. No person, no movement, nothing. The sound had simply stopped. That was enough. We grabbed our backpacks and started descending immediately. The entire hike back felt different. Nobody joked. Nobody wandered. Nobody stopped to take pictures. We just walked. Fast. Several times I caught myself looking over my shoulder. Every time the trail remained empty. Until the final mile. That's when I noticed footprints. Fresh footprints. Ahead of us. Not behind us. Ahead. The problem was they hadn't been there earlier. We would have seen them. The trail was muddy enough that fresh tracks stood out immediately. Yet somehow a set of footprints now appeared in front of us, leading the same direction we were going, towards the parking lot. The tracks continued for nearly a half a mile. Then they disappeared. Just disappeared. No turnoff, no side trail, no explanation. By the time we reached the parking lot, the sun was beginning to set, and every vehicle remained exactly where we left it, including ours. At first. Then Eric stopped walking. "Did you lock your truck?" I looked. His driver's door was slightly open, only by an inch or two, but definitely open. We all knew he locked it. We'd watched him do it. Nothing appeared stolen. Nothing appeared damaged, yet the door stood open, just enough to let someone know they'd been inside. We left immediately. Months later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched for information about the tower. Old maps, historical records, hiking forums, anything. Eventually I found one reference. A decades-old forestry document mentioning a fire tower that had been officially dismantled in the late 1980s. Same location, same mountain. According to the document, the the structure no longer existed, which made no sense because we stood inside it. To this day, none of us can explain what happened. Maybe someone rebuilt it. Maybe the records were wrong. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. But one detail still bothers me. A year after the hike, Eric received a message from someone on a hiking forum, a complete stranger. The message contained only one sentence. Next time, don't go inside. No explanation, no context, no follow-up, just that. And after everything that happened that day, none of us have ever returned to look for the tower again.